When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Status differences can complicate any conversation. Imagine two friends planning a road trip. One has been on dozens of cross-country adventures, while the other rarely ventures beyond their hometown. The experienced traveler might dominate the planning, assuming their knowledge is superior. But what if the novice has a real knack for finding hidden roadside gems and quaint diners and cute bookstores and kitschy bars and even more? If the conversation is tilted by perceived expertise, the trip might miss out on real fun. This is where the concept of bracketed status differences comes in. In an ideal public sphere theorized by many writers, citizens temporarily set aside their social rank and wealth and expertise when they engage in debate. In short, they debate as equals. They show evidence rather than assert it. Everyone's voice is treated relatively equally. That doesn't mean everyone's right, and it doesn't mean everyone's validated, but the focus shifts from who is speaking to what is being said. Think about a family gathering. Maybe there's an uncle who's a doctor and weighs in on every health-related topic with authority, but the youngest cousin, fresh from her biology class, brings up some research she heard in class. In a free and fair conversation, the cousin wouldn't be casually dismissed for lacking credentials. Instead, the research would be scrutinized to see if the data holds up or if the reasoning is sound. Of course, bracketing status differences is much easier said than done. Power dynamics tend to creep in automatically. Picture a workplace meeting where a junior employee has a good, groundbreaking idea. Even if it's brilliant, the CEO might brush it aside, while a more senior manager making essentially the same suggestion could get applause. When status trumps substance, good ideas get lost. But when people consciously create a space where status is bracketed, conversations can change. It's not about pretending that we don't have different backgrounds and experiences. It's about refusing to let those differences hijack collective decisions. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Joe Cunningham. Joe served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2019 to 2021. He is also the former Democratic nominee for governor in South Carolina, and he is currently the owner of Joe Cunningham Law. Joe, tell us an argument story.
Jump right into it, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about on the way over here today about an argument story, and I think the one that's been stuck in my mind for the last couple of years, and coincidentally, it's an argument still happening within the ranks of the Democratic Party, is what happened in 2024 with Joe Biden. When I was running for governor of South Carolina as a Democratic nominee back in 2022, I flew up to New York, did an interview on CNN, and was the first person to come out and say that Joe Biden should not run for re-election. This was based upon discussions I've had with people on the ground in South Carolina, Democratic Party chairs, everyone essentially agreeing that it'd be time for him to step aside and that we need new generation of leadership and new blood. And so obviously there are people who disagreed. When we were up there in New York after coming off the live segment on CNN, people were blowing up my phone, blowing up my general consultant's phone, press secretary for Biden, like all these people within this national orbit who were upset. And it's not like I said anything disparaging. It is a very Southern way of saying we disagree, right?
You just said he shouldn't seek another term.
Yeah, shouldn't seek another term. It wasn't any indictment on him or who he is or who he was. That was back in 2022. Now, fast forward, I think in the early part of 2024, when Biden had already announced his run for re-election, and I stood in the same place. And I came out in the Post and Courier, which is Charleston's paper, with an op-ed announcing my new position as the national director for a group called No Labels, who was seeking to introduce a third option for those at the time that were unhappy with the Biden-Trump rematch. After putting that op-ed out, I received even more criticism from friends, from family, old colleagues, lost a lot of friends in that, I mean, and from all ranks too, right? The DNC chairs reaching out, expressing his frustration. And it's a moment when, we talk about when we disagree, it's the one that comes to mind for me. And I think that the takeaway is, there's not always always a common ground we agree on, and some arguments will meet the inflection point where it's like, hey, we're not going to agree on this, and I'm not going to win you over my side. You're not going to win me over yours. And that's how sometimes arguments end.
This strikes me as a big common theme, which is about Biden, the person, in 22 and then again in 24, but then with the no labels position, also about the party. And so I can imagine those who are Biden loyalists in 22 saying, what are you doing, stepping out of line? But then I can also imagine them in 24 saying, okay, well, now you're leaving, you're excommunicating yourself from the tribe. So let's go back to the 22 position. How do you think that your argument that Biden, and he himself hinted that he wouldn't seek another term when running in 20, so the 22 position that you made doesn't seem that far out of step at that point, even if you were the first person to say it in 22. How do you think that position has aged when you think back on your argument in 22?
Better than Biden. No offense. No, it's aged pretty well. And again, it's not like something that I just kind of came to or that I thought of. I launched a statewide tour back in, I think, 2022 when I was running for governor. Maybe even earlier, maybe it was 2021, late 2021, but where I wanted to go to all 46 counties. And I could say, and let's take a step back and remember how pivotal of a state South Carolina is in choosing Democratic presidential nominees, right? The first in the South, or maybe the first in the nation, depending on which way the rules are interpreted on any given cycle. But definitely the most diverse early state, right? And I can say with the utmost confidence today, nobody spoke to more Democrats during that period of time than me in South Carolina. And I would go to these counties. The party chairs even said that they didn't want Biden to run for reelection. And so the disconnect, I felt, and the numbers showed it too, right? 2/3 of Democrats thought that Biden should not seek reelection. And it just struck me, like, how is it that so many Democrats are saying this and thinking this, and these polls are slapping people right in their face? However, no Democratic elected officials or no Democrats running for office have the fortitude to step up and say this. Like, where is the 435 members of the House, half or whatever are Democrats. None of the 200 plus will come out and say what 2/3 of their own voters think and feel. And we know why. I mean, I know why. And I'm happy to go into that. But so that's what kind of led me to kind of step out and voice that opinion and voice that, because I feel like it is important, not just to get out into the conversation, but because at that time in 2022, there was still enough runway to make a change. When he stepped aside in late 2024, Kamala took over. I mean, never mind what you might think about Kamala as a candidate or person or whatever. There was just a very limited amount of runway for someone to launch the type of campaign, get to know voters, and earn their trust.
Yeah, historically unprecedented in the modern age of political campaigns. Monday morning quarterbacking this thing well after the election. How do you think that process should have gone? So obviously the Biden loyalists were going to keep him from stepping down until he had already secured an unopposed nomination. But if your position would have won, let's say in January of 24 instead of June of 24, is the election outcome different?
I don't know. If I had my druthers, just fully Monday morning quarterbacking this, Biden should not have declared to run for re-election. He should have been the bridge to a new generation of leadership, as he once promised.
There would have been a full primary
caucus.
Full on
primary, have may the best person win, and have, Democratic Party has a good bench. I think a lot of that bench has been tarnished through this process with Biden. And I think anybody and this is my opinion, obviously, which is what you're here for if you're still tuning in.
That's right.
I think anybody who was tangential to Biden's sphere of influence bears some responsibility for what transpired. And all these, front runners or names are being floated, who was it? Oh, it was Tim Walz, who's coming down to speak to South Carolina Democratic Party for their annual big dinner. Obviously, because it's an important state, a lot of these national leaders are going to be flocking to our state here in South Carolina. And these are questions that need to be answered. So going back to the original question, sorry. He shouldn't have run. He should have opened it up. But as he stayed in, obviously my preference would have been for him to get out as soon as possible. Had he waited to the last minute like he did, I would have still liked to have seen some type of mini primary or some type of process where people can actually vote and participate in democracy. I mean, here we were barnstorming the country saying we're running to save our democracy, waiting, running to Trump's going to end our democracy. And at the same time, we're telling voters that, no, look, we got this. We'll tell you who your nominee is going to be. We're going to tell you who is best for you. Yeah. I mean, that's the antithesis of democracy. So I think we really not only, obviously, going back, we know what the result was with Harris, but even beyond that, the damage that was done by essentially the coronation instead of a nomination on Harris it eroded so much trust between the voters and the Democratic Party.
I'm curious about the launch of No Labels third option in 24 and your pronoun usage consistently, as we've been talking about the Democratic Party, has been about we. And so between the No Labels third option and talking about Democrats in a we sense, where do you stand now?
Well, I'm a private citizen now, right? I'm not running for anything. I've got my frustrations with Democrats. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I grew up in far western Kentucky where the Democratic Party has done so much for rural voters and has helped lift up people in the lower socioeconomic class. I'm very frustrated with the party's refusal to acknowledge mistakes made and refusal to right the wrongs. And people ask me all the time, jumping in this race here in South Carolina's first congressional district or any future races. My beliefs and my values haven't changed. Like most people, I'm anxiously awaiting to see whether or not the party can pull itself out and whether or not voices like mine still have a place. Because I spent a lot of time talking about Biden, talking about where the missteps have been. And what's ironic is, as this autopsy unfolds, the Democratic Party, none of the folks who were vocal from the beginning, Dean Phillips is a good friend of mine who ran for president against Biden. The guy should have a front row seat in these discussions and should have some input as to how the party has disaffected so many people and so many voters. And so if it's going to be the big tent party, it's got to encompass the views that may not be too comfortable to embrace.
What did you learn about fighting with an institution as large as a political party?
Somebody told me the Democrats and Republicans are the two biggest gangs in the United States. And I felt every bit of that. Being part of No Labels, it really, and trying to get ballot access, right? Because a lot of people say, you run a third party, running for president. It ain't so easy. Getting ballot access, in 50 different states, it's like practicing law in 50 different states, different jurisdictions. Some people require signatures, some people require meetings and caucuses and things like that and nominations. And then on top of that, you also have the forces and the undercurrents working against you. Mm-hmm. And going back to Dean Phillips, this is a guy, Democrat, serving, a current member of Congress who was running at the time, a Democratic member. And you had Democrats throwing him off the ballot in states like Florida and North Carolina, refusing to hold a primary. Even when they feel like, Biden is our man, he's our choice, he's the current president. Yes, that should afford him a certain level of respect, but not to totally undermine the actual democratic process. And so witnessing some of those things firsthand, and then watching the media kind of downplay it or even bury it in some circumstances, really opened up my eyes to this whole notion that, as a lifelong Democrat, I thought we stood on these, we carried this mantle of protecting democracy. This was our thing. And to see instances like that, less than honorable means trying to attack your access to the ballot, which is a constitutional right, really kind of wore on me.
I imagine it did, and I've heard others talk about third-party access as being very much a rigged game. To your point about the gang influence.
Well, we heard Bernie Sanders, screaming about it in 2016, and at the time I was one of those who's like, Bernie's just upset. He just, he's losing, and he's crying, and like, then you become closer to this process, and you watch it unfold. And you're in meetings with attorneys or with ballot signature gatherers, and you realize, wow, this is very hard, but people are making it harder than it has to be, while at the same time taking away people's rights.
I remember arguments from Perot and Nader, for those of a certain generation, making similar kinds of cases, and it seems. And this is where I want to conclude, is to talk about these as institutions from an institutional self-preservation, limiting the Republicans and Democrats might not agree on much, but they certainly agree on they should be the only two games in town.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's a binary system right now, and it's hard to break through. If there's ever time for something like that, opportunity like this, it was with the Biden-Trump rematch. The numbers were there. At the end of the day, we pulled down that project simply because we couldn't find some, and we said from the onset, we're only going to run a candidate if they have a pathway to victory and we believe they can win. If we can't find somebody that has what we believe the spark to ignite a broader discussion, then we won't do it. And so we ultimately pulled it down. We made it pretty damn far in the process, and ultimately it wasn't the Biden-Trump rematch. It was the Kamala Trump, and people's feelings started to soften, like they can make an easier decision one way or another.
Concluding, coming back to the person and the party, one of the phrases I love about American politics that I consistently debate, so I offer this more as fodder and less as truth, which is that when it comes to presidential politics, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And this, to me, is the irony of the Biden administration, because you stretch it back with Democrats through Clinton, right, from Kennedy, arguably Carter in 76, certainly Clinton in 92 and 96, then, of course, Obama in 2008, 2012. There's a really good case to be made that these are not party creatures necessarily that are being elected. These are forces of personality who are reshaping the party as they know it, especially in the case with Clinton, especially in the case with Obama. And so the argument that Democrats have fallen in love is pretty true there. Biden is the exception. Of any president in my lifetime, maybe any president since the invention of television reshaped American politics, he was more a creature of his party in the White House than anybody else, right? So he has really conservative views on X, Y, and Z, abortion, et cetera, in the 70s because his party did. He changes that. He moved as his party moved. And yet, as you stress, he's decidedly the most anti-democratic person in a way, because, as you said, a lot of Democrats didn't want him to continue going in 24, and he did. And so the irony of the Biden legacy for me is the most pro-party, anti-fall-in-love person that we've had is a person who, as you said, kind of bucked the party consensus to seek or to prolong his term and into 24.
Yeah, I mean, people remember how you leave, right? And my dad always told me the most important part of being somewhere is knowing when to leave. If Biden had some successes, and I was never disrespectful about the wins that he had, but if he had simply honored his word and decided to move on, but there's something, and I've been there, I've been in office before, I know how I can get comfortable, I know that, you get accustomed to that, and again, I'm sure there's going to be more that comes out as to how and why that decision to run for re-election was made. But unfortunately, despite his successes, this is how he's going to be remembered, and it's not going to be viewed favorably overall.
People remember how you leave.
That's right. Does that mean it's my time to leave?
Joe Cunningham, thanks so much for being on When We Disagree.
Thanks for having me.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.